Hey folks, before we get into today's podcast, I wanted to let you know about our upcoming QCon software development conferences. We will be back in person at QCon London this April 4 to 6 and online with the QCon Plus May 10 to 20. Join the world's most innovative senior software engineers across multiple domains in person and online as they share their real-world implementation of emerging trends and practices. You can learn more about the events at qconferences.com. We hope to see you there. Good day, folks. This is Shane Hastie for the InfoQ Engineering Culture Podcast. I'm sitting down today across the miles with Anand Sufi. Anand, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Pleasure is all mine, Shane. Thank you so much for having me on the InfoQ podcast. As I was kind of saying that this is a wish list item come true, so really happy to make this happen.
Thank you so much. So who's Anand?
Professionally, I am an engineering leader as a title, but your question is definitely more beyond the titles, which everybody can see through various forums. I think I'm someone who's just passionate about helping people grow, and in turn, that brings me growth. I do have a growth mindset in turn, but it's not about trying to just pick up the next best skill or trying to make the next vertical career move. Actually, for me as a person is trying to, at least if I have experienced something good or learning wise, constructive or positive, I'm going to make sure I can enable with those learnings so they either succeed with those things or tips in mind or are aware of the common pitfalls and don't end up making the same mistakes I did. So I'm a very, I would say, collaborative and communicative person in that sense, overall as a personality.
One of the things that intrigued me when we were corresponding was a statement you made that moving from an individual contributor to an engineering manager leadership role is not a promotion. Why not?
Thank you for bringing that up, actually, because I went through this journey myself a few years ago. And as I said, if I have some structuralization, the first thing is I feel comfortable that, okay, do I probably understand why did I have that feeling? And if I do, then I absolutely want to share with folks. So recently, I think over the past decade, we have seen very commonly two separate tracks for technology-centric roles, which is the technical track and then the leadership and management track. Actually, that was not the case probably for most time, right? It simply meant that in a company, if you're doing reasonably solid as an engineer or you are a great individual contributor, the next step meant for maybe more compensation, more authority, more power dynamics, just having a more influence. It meant you needed to be a manager, actually. And that's just how influence comes along. But those are two different career paths that we are talking about. We're talking about a lateral move when we talk about going from an engineer to a manager. And it's not a promotion because you will probably do different set of responsibilities. It's not a promotion because probably the topics that you had in mind that being a manager, you would kind of get those out right are not true. I, for a fact, know engineers that make much more than a manager would, right, in their early career, because even within management track, there are levels in that sense. So just simply becoming a manager does not mean that you'll get paid more, actually. It simply does not mean that you have the will to hire and fire people. I wish companies operated, or I don't wish that companies operated on the whims of just one individual's person or likes and dislikes in the sense, right? So there's a very thoughtful and structured process. Engineering management means giving up on a lot of the things that you probably enjoy as an engineer. So that is a big point there. I have 3 or 4 buckets, which I can speak to as well in terms of what is the day-to-day responsibilities that will end up looking different. And that hopefully translates to this not being a promotion as it did to me when I kind of realized those buckets.
So let's explore. What are those buckets? What are those areas?
Sure. So let me share the 4 buckets at a high level, and then we can go into any one in detail, depending on which one you find most interesting. So the first one is simply the amount of coding time. As an engineer, the fact that you want to be or continue being an engineer is you get to code at least 70-80% of your time other than team meetings or other kind of things that come up. Becoming an engineering manager, you might not see that shift happen outright, but in 6 months, in a year's time, in 3 years' time, it will happen. You cannot continue coding, right? I have not coded probably for months now, which is zero. And zero is a real number here, which is pretty common depending on the situation or the teams or the charter you are leading, actually. The amount of coding time is the first realization in terms of this being completely different. The second realization is the focus time versus meeting time. So as an IC, as an individual contributor, you might still get, even with meetings and distractions, you might get an afternoon on a solid 3 to 4 hour window for heads down time or focus time. As an engineering manager, this was true for me, and I've talked with a lot of my peers, and this is true for most, is you get those times in bits and pieces. You might have a meeting, you probably have 45 minutes off, you have another meeting. But throughout the day, you have pockets of meetings, which are important. I don't want to just simply dismiss that meetings are not important, because the meetings that you're on as an engineering manager are different than the team's notion that, oh, we have too many meetings. That is a different thing. Engineering managers meeting could range anything from their one-on-ones with the direct reports, could be a team meeting, could be working with their leadership on some strategy, could be people or HR meeting about recruiting and hiring, could be a collaboration meeting with their other stakeholders or cross-discipline partners, actually, in terms of product and design. So that is kind of important to first seek clarity and have the information needed to pass down into actionable process or task-based roadmap to your team, actually, in that sense. So the whole focus time versus meeting time is important because your time will get fragmented. The third is, and probably one of my favorite, is definition of success. So when we talk about engineering or my engineering IC days, I would get a dopamine boost if my PR was approved or if my build went green and if my code was merged and look, the feature is out. I have CI/CD. I completed 3 tickets. So that was success to me as an engineer. My day ended on a high note, actually. As a manager in that leadership and management track, success is abstract. There is no clear data points in terms of, because you had 50 code commits or you completed 20 tickets, you are successful in your role today. You need to come up with your own set of metric or evaluation. And it took me time to realize over time. I was doing a lot of things as an engineering manager. I continue to do it, but was not sure if those are making an impact or am I successful in the role, actually. So for me, then I was, this week, we did not have any customer P0, P1 issues. This week, none of my direct reports said that their morale is low or they don't have clarity or they don't kind of like working on this team or project. This week, none of my product and design counterparts had said that they had a tough time collaborating with an engineer or with engineering, actually. And that was successful for me. No conflict, clarity, alignment, and high morale, and those things in that sense. So the whole success becoming more abstract, and you need to kind of think in bets is important, actually. And then the last thing is you need to also be comfortable that you will move to an enabler model versus a creator model. In terms of, as an engineer, you will create software, you will create solutions, you might be able to roll up your sleeves so much more often and do an implementation thing. As a manager, as much as you would like to show your prowess technically, it's best that you don't solve for the team, actually. You want to not become a bottleneck for the team. And I think that's why you need to enable others to take technical leadership and day-to-day responsibility so you can continue to have a dual presence with the team and outside of the team as well. So the whole creator versus enabler mindset is important, actually, in that sense.
So these are, as you say, very, very different competencies and skills to what most of our engineers have been taught. We hear the stories of, we take the best engineer and we make them the worst manager. How do we enable that transition for the people that want to go down that path?
So I think most companies approach this in 2 ways, right? One is tenure-based and the second is interest-based. Tenure-based is, you have been here for 10 years. You probably are a tech lead or a senior engineer. It may be time for you to get a report or 2. Fortunately, we are seeing this not be the case, that people are being asked whether they would like to manage folks rather than simply saying that you should take on more people management responsibilities because you have been here longer. And the second is interest-based, which I think where our strengths lie, where engineers like myself, actually, I knew from early on, I've always had some sort of leadership or collaboration aspect to my role, actually, where I knew that I could definitely continue to become more technically solid and become a principal staff engineer, but I thought I had much more to offer to the company than simply my coding abilities actually. And it does not mean that, oh, you should not be a principal or staff engineer because you'll always end up coding, but the discussions that you will be in will be around technical architecture and roadmap versus the discussions that I am in are part those, parts strategy, part hiring and recruiting, part people management and growth in that sense, actually. So that is important in terms of interest-based kind of enablement. I talked to numerous staff engineers, right? They said, if I were to let go of somebody, if a situation ever came, that's a curveball for them. They could not do it. Or like, that's one of the toughest conversations. Like, how do you stand up in front of somebody and have that emotional strength to keep that emotions aside, that you work with this person for years or you're kind of a colleague and a great peer, and you're to tell them times are tough or we are going through something and probably this is a misfit in that sense actually, right? So that is kind of the parts in terms of people are not showing interest because there is a tough people and emotional angle or spin to it actually, which is probably the most difficult part of engineering management. The engineering part is, I'm not going to say easy, but it's manageable because you do come from an engineering background and you do have that fundamental foundational knowledge, which probably is the most you need for most of your outside engineering conversations anyways, actually.
Where do we build those skills? How do we build those skills?
Another important point when you ask that question now, I realize I skipped upon is mentorship and coaching in that sense, which is you probably should start as a manager, or even if you are an engineer, you should not feel hesitant to manage up. And manage up does not just simply mean that you tell your manager that this is wrong or you're not aligned with me or you're not giving me enough time. Managing up means also advocating for your interests and goals, actually. So you should be having conversations with your managers as engineers in terms of where your interests lie. And that could be that my interests lie in seeing people grow, or my interests lie in mentoring junior folks actually to give them the necessary knowledge, or my interest lies in making sure that when the project or the product that I'm working on faces customers for the first time, or customers are going to look at it, it's technically stable. I don't want to crash in my application because I cannot kind of take it, because that is my interest lie in terms of ensuring technical stability for the solution that I built or the product that I'm involved in. So that is where the first kind of indication will come in terms of what skills do we need to nurture as managers in our engineers or in our direct reports in that sense. So then it's on the manager to find you the right opportunities related to those skills actually. And at the same time, trying to evolve, because for early on in my career as a junior to mid engineer, I was telling these things, but I did not knew that this basically means I'm probably better suited for the engineering leadership or management track rather than simply being an engineer. So there's some mind mapping involved on the manager's part actually to make sure that I am hearing over time that this person is more interested in how we are approaching the customer roadmap or how we are building the product, how we are trying to connect with our stakeholders, how I am trying to ensure that there is a morale high. So they're interested in probably much beyond our technical stability, that this person is not coming into one-on-ones and asking me in terms of about that AWS outage or the war room incident last week. What was the technical issue actually? Or what was the root cause? They probably could do it if asked to, but that is not where their curiosity lies. Their curiosity lies in terms of what are we doing from a product development perspective? Are we going to hire 2 more engineers? Are we going to train our people, or are we going to have a mentoring system in place actually? So over time, it's kind of a 2-part system, right? As engineers, you need to be, or you probably don't need to be, but over time you need to get clarity in terms of things you like doing and probably might not like doing actually. And at the same time, as managers, you need to be able to nurture somebody's strengths and find opportunities, but at the same time also seeing if there's a way to have them build their less stronger points as well actually, because you don't need to always play to everyone's strength. That's how people build winning teams, as they say, just like kind of bring everyone's strengths on board actually, but then you have a team of specialists and you don't have smart generalists. Some teams do need smart generalists, so you need to make sure that people are also going out of their comfort zone or challenging themselves to an extent.
You mentioned mentoring. Let's explore that because we know it's a good idea. We hear all sorts of things about mentoring is a great way to help people grow. But what does it look like in practice? And how can somebody in a team, one, choose, request mentoring and also offer to be a mentor?
So it's interesting. I was actually just in a conversation doing an interview, and one of the leadership candidates just upon mentoring, coaching, and they were training. Training is something simply learning and educational, so we'll not talk about that. Mentoring and coaching are two main buckets where people, or even I, make the mistake of, depending on the time and mood of the day, I might use them interchangeably, which is not the right thing to do, actually. But what I have come to understand is coaching is probably where you get specialized assistance or help in terms of a specific goal, actually. That is maybe over time you need to get better or you need to work gradually towards that thing. That is, I am getting a life coach because I need to fundamentally change my habit or my mindset as a person. Or I am now getting a leadership coach because over time I want to make sure that I am one of the most empathetic leaders. It will not happen overnight, actually. While mentorship, fortunately, can be short-lived and it is a little bit task-based in that sense, actually. So that is the layman definition of mentorship. How do we put it into practice? The wonderful thing about mentorship is that there is no formal leadership or management title involved around mentorship. We see that very common in engineering teams, that the senior engineer onboards a junior engineer, is around there to ask them questions, right? People call them assigning a mentor, having a buddy system in place, trying to just have someone be available, that you have a mentor who has lived through your experience in some form and has something of value to offer. That something of value to offer does not mean a clear way of doing that thing, but they can walk with you actually in terms of getting you through that challenge that you're going through, right? They will simply not say, oh, yes, I had that same thing as well, the build issue. Just run this command and you are done. Actually, that's simply just giving the answer or just top down in the sense. Mentoring is working with you and just, oh, let's dive right in. What's happening? Probably it's a thing right this, right? That maybe let's check something actually. So trying to be a little bit more collaborative in that sense, that is trying to walk with someone actually, rather than just pointing them the way, like this is where you need to go, just go and it's done actually. That's one aspect. And the second is, as I said, right, that was simply when it's more reactive mentoring. But the proactive mentoring is when somebody has a short-term goal identified. In 3 months, I want to change job. Or in a year, I want to pick up on the next front-end technology that is upcoming actually. Then mentoring is really useful in terms of you can work with your mentor because they probably have gone through the same kind of thought or professional transformation, and they can offer ideas on how you might approach it actually in that sense.
What does it take to be a good mentor?
Excellent question. I think I'm continuing to realize actually that the first thing is the art of listening, and also that active listening, because there are two pieces. First, the art of listening simply because as a mentor, you just might want to be, for lack of a better word, be preachy and start imparting knowledge that you should do this, you should do that actually, before the mentee even finishes the problem, or even who knows, that might not be the problem. That might be a symptom. The underlying problem might be something totally different. It might be a cause and effect situation, actually. So before that, I've seen, or I used to say, oh, yes, I've seen that before. These are the 3 things you can do. Let's dive right in. And then I realize over time, they will come back after 10 minutes. Wow, all of you that said, I respect you. That makes sense. But probably what I was trying to say is something different, actually, in that sense. And that is the art of listening. And the second thing also I said, like just immediately following, is active listener, right? Because trying to understand what they're trying to convey and not having kind of the need to just answer back. Because you probably, when you sit through their problem statement. As mentees, I continue to be a mentee and I have trouble when somebody is asking me, so what exactly is going on with you? What problem do I say? Maybe it's a low morale thing. Maybe I don't like my project. Maybe I have an imposter syndrome. Maybe I have some personal thing going on. How do I structure it into one sentence? So you need to have an active listening in terms of, are there split tracks? Are they trying to say two different things as a part of a problem? Are they trying to imply something much more deeper, or are they trying to simply be too self-critical? Actually, oftentimes that happens, right? People set so much higher bars for themselves, and at times you need to tell them, I don't think that's a problem which you think is a problem, in terms of, I think you're doing well. You're probably being over self-critical. And let's talk about it in terms of, why do you feel so strongly about that? So trying to play back their question so that you have understood correctly, and trying to identify if there are any split tracks, multiple topics, or if they're trying to have strong emotional connection with the problem, or it's simply where they feel that everyone around them is growing and they are not growing, and those things actually. So listening is important as a mentor actually. And then I'll end my answer by saying the second most important thing is, Kent Beck put it wonderfully actually at a conference a couple of months back, that the secret part about mentorship is where the mentor gets more out of it than the mentee actually. Because I have been in situations where every time I have to try to use my past experience, it does not fit the parameters or the context of the situation that this person is facing. So trying to bring a fresh perspective, open mind, trying to work together on brainstorming ideas actually, that is critical thinking for myself. I probably get to do that, but to a finite amount in my team and role. So as a mentor, you will experience actually much more, I would say, food for thought and just kind of regeneration if you probably didn't let your past success or failures follow through. And they're good indicators, but they should not be the solutions to each and every new problem that comes up actually.
Thank you for that. So mentoring is part of an engineering culture. What does a good engineering culture look like? What are some of the things that we need to have in place, and that one, individual contributors, but also as leaders, that we can do to nurture that effective culture?
Yeah, I think my umbrella answer in 2 words for that entire thing would be psychological safety. And trying to go deep into that would mean that as leaders and as managers, you need to give the psychological safety to folks that churn might come at times. Change management is common at times. Chaos is common at times, especially in these times where companies are securing Series A, B, C, D, E fundings day in, day out. Companies go into hypergrowth mode overnight, but then with growth comes growing pains, and they don't realize how to live with it actually. So I would say that a good engineering culture sticks to 3 things in any given curveball that is thrown to them. And that relates to psychological safety as the umbrella, but those 3 things are sticking to its original mission, right? With each new situation, you don't need to pivot, right? There are engineering teams which see that their competitor is doing something, and we need to go do that. As an engineering organization, it's good to have some form of competitive awareness, but you need to understand what your mission is, or if you're trying to make some different kind of impact in your industry actually, then you need to stick to your mission, which is really important actually. It's not that you are rigid or stubborn actually, but kind of your core guiding policies need to more or less stay the same. The second is the people actually, that you need to continue believing in people. And that's important for leadership and management, right? That if a company is going through a rough patch, the last thing leadership should do is finger pointing downwards in terms of, well, looks like the ICs are not pulling in their weight, or probably people are taking it too easy and we have so many issues or something, right? It's a team win and a team failure in that sense, right? So they really need to pull it together in the sense that there is no sentiment or negativity around finger pointing or the blame shifting, those kind of things, as an engineering culture is kind of core DNA or fabric. So that's the people in the sense. And the third, probably similar, that is values, right? If as a culture you value transparency, then because there was some leadership change, then you should not say that, well, now we are going to have behind the curtain meetings only. We should not make this thing public with the engineers. The engineers or people who are there should have the psychological safety to be vocal about any incoming leadership process change, especially when it feels that it's out of context or it's being pushed onto them without getting their input in that sense, actually. So the values that an engineering team lives by, the people that it supports, nurtures, and relies upon, and the mission that it continues to kind of have as their North Star goal in mind is kind of what makes a good culture overall. And I think as a recipe of success in that sense.
And thanks for that. Some really interesting points and things for us to ponder. If the audience want to continue the conversation, where do they find you?
Currently, it keeps on changing, but my number one source probably for the foreseeable future is LinkedIn. I love connecting with people, meeting with people. So definitely send me a message on LinkedIn or a request. It's Anand Sufi. Would love to connect there. I also have a Medium page, a Twitter account, a GitHub profile, a Linktree account, many things to just supplement it. But I think that will simply be looking at the work that I've done and maybe more of a highlight. But connecting with me is definitely LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Shane, again for having me. And it was great to speak to you on, as you said, a number of different topics and at least kind of food for thought for kind of the next logical step or just something to think about.